Hello, and welcome to Forgotten Ties. Have you ever felt that a part of you, a memory you thought was lost forever, was just waiting to be found? Waiting in the most unexpected place, whispered by the most unlikely person. This is the story of Eleanor Vance, a woman who built a life on a foundation she believed was solid, only to have a single, chilling utterance shatter everything she thought she knew. Eleanor, a name that sounds as elegant and grounded as the woman herself, was a successful architect in her late 40s. She had a kind, steady husband named Michael, a man whose quiet strength was the perfect anchor for her more creative, sometimes chaotic mind. Their life was a testament to stability, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, complete with a meticulously tended garden, and 2 grown children who were off building their own lives. From the outside, theirs was a story of a life well lived, a testament to hard work and shared dreams. But a storm was brewing, not in the skies, but in the quiet corridors of Eleanor's mind. A storm named guilt. It wasn't a secret affair or a financial misdeed. It was something far more insidious, far more deeply rooted. It was the guilt of forgetting. Forgetting a past she had deliberately walled off, a past so painful she had convinced herself it never existed. She carried the weight of a childhood she couldn't fully recall, a blank space in her memory that stretched back to her early teens. Her parents, who had passed away years ago, had always been evasive about that time, and her adopted brother, a quiet, reserved man who rarely spoke of the past, had offered no clues. This void, this unfillable chasm, often manifested in small, unsettling ways. A fleeting scent of honeysuckle could bring a wave of inexplicable sadness. The sound of a carousel could trigger a brief, dizzying flash of a child's face, not her own, but someone she couldn't place. She had rationalized these moments away as common anxiety or simple nostalgia, burying them under the routine and comfort of her life. The crack in the facade appeared on a rainy Tuesday. Eleanor was volunteering at a local homeless shelter, a place she had devoted her time to for over a year. She was sorting through a donation of old coats, the damp wool smell a familiar comfort, when she noticed a woman sitting alone in a corner. The woman was older, her face a road map of hardship and sorrow. Her hair was a tangled silver mess, and her eyes, though clouded with age and grief, held a piercing, knowing gaze. Eleanor, always drawn to those who seemed most in need of a kind word, approached her with a gentle smile. "Hello there," she said, her voice soft. "Can I get you anything? A cup of coffee, maybe a sandwich?" The woman didn't respond immediately. She simply stared, her eyes tracing the lines of Eleanor's face as if she were reading a long-lost book. The silence stretched, becoming thick and suffocating. Eleanor felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being seen in a way that she hadn't been in decades. It wasn't just scrutiny, it was recognition. Finally, the woman's lips parted, and a raspy voice, like dry leaves rustling in a forgotten attic, broke the silence. She didn't ask for coffee. She didn't ask for food. She just spoke a single, strange, and impossible name. A name that Eleanor had not heard since she was a small child, a name only her mother had ever used. Little Finch. The world tilted. The familiar sounds of the shelter, the clatter of trays, the murmur of voices faded into a distant hum. The name, whispered with such a strange mix of affection and pain, wasn't a public nickname. It was a secret, a private endearment her mother used to whisper as she tucked Eleanor into bed. Her husband didn't know it. Her children didn't know it. No one outside her immediate, long-dead family had ever known it. The air grew cold, and a shiver, not from the dampness of the room, ran down her spine. The woman at the shelter, a complete stranger, knew her childhood nickname. And in that moment, the tightly constructed walls of Eleanor's life began to crumble, revealing a terrifying truth. The past wasn't buried, it was just sleeping. And now it was awake. Eleanor stood frozen, the name echoing in the hollow space between her ears. Her breath caught in her throat, a physical knot of shock and fear. "What did you say?" she finally managed to choke out, her voice barely a whisper. The woman, whose name Eleanor would later learn was Beatrice, simply smiled, a sad, knowing curve of her lips. She didn't repeat the name. She didn't have to. The damage was already done. Eleanor, her mind reeling, tried to rationalize it. A coincidence? A random guess? But the name, Little Finch, was too specific, too personal. It was a fragment of a childhood she had buried so deep, she had convinced herself it was just a dream. She sank onto the bench across from Beatrice, her hands trembling. How do you know that name? Beatrice's eyes, those old, wise eyes, seemed to soften. Some things, she said, her voice a little stronger now, you never forget. They stick to you like burrs, no matter how far you run. The vagueness of her answer only fueled Eleanor's growing panic. This was no ordinary homeless woman. This was a ghost from a past she had tried to erase. Driven by an urgent, desperate need for answers, Eleanor began to question her. Where did she know that name from? Was she a friend of her mother's? A distant relative? Each question was met with a cryptic response, a piece of a puzzle that made no sense. Beatrice spoke of a place with tall, lonely trees and a house that smelled of cinnamon and dust. She mentioned a girl with a missing tooth and a dog named Buster. Details that sent a cold wave of recognition through Eleanor, even though she couldn't place them. The knot in Eleanor's stomach tightened. The details were too precise to be mere speculation. They felt like memories, not her own, but someone else's, being whispered into her mind. She tried to push back against the tide of dread, but it was relentless. The conversation, if you could call it that, felt less like an exchange and more like an interrogation of her own forgotten history. Beatrice spoke of a fire. A fire that wasn't accidental. She spoke of a car that drove away but didn't come back. The words were a jumble, a disjointed and terrifying narrative that seemed to swirl around a central, horrifying event, an event that Eleanor had no memory of. As the shelter began to empty and the volunteers started their evening cleanup, Eleanor realized she had lost all sense of time. She couldn't leave. Not now. Not with this woman, this strange, haunting figure who held the keys to her past. She convinced Beatrice to stay a little longer, to let her buy her a warm meal outside. Beatrice, to Eleanor's surprise, agreed without hesitation. As they sat in a quiet diner booth, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on their faces, Eleanor laid her cards on the table. Look, she said, her voice low and pleading, I don't know who you are, but you know things about my childhood that no one else does. Please tell me. I need to know. Beatrice took a slow sip of her hot tea. You don't remember, do you, Little Finch? She said, her gaze steady. You don't remember the day they took you. You don't remember the screams. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The teacup clattered in her saucer. Took me? What are you talking about? My parents raised me. I was their daughter. Beatrice shook her head. They took you. They changed your name. They told everyone you were theirs, but you weren't. You were always ours. The weight of those words, ours, hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. The blank space in her memory wasn't a result of a tragic accident or a simple childhood amnesia. It was a deliberate erasure. A lie meticulously crafted and maintained for 40 years. The puzzle pieces, the ones Beatrice had been so carefully dropping, began to click into place, forming a picture so monstrous, Eleanor didn't want to see it. The scent of honeysuckle, the flash of a child's face, the unsettling feeling of being a ghost in her own life, it all made a terrible, twisted kind of sense. She wasn't Eleanor Vance. She was someone else. And the woman across the table, a disheveled stranger from a homeless shelter, knew her real name. The world she had built, her stable, predictable, and happy life, was nothing but a fragile house of cards, built on a lie she had never known to question. The past wasn't just sleeping, it was a hungry beast, and it had just awoken. And it was coming for her. The revelation hung in the air, a silent, monstrous presence that separated Eleanor from the woman across the table. Eleanor's world, once so stable and predictable, had been ripped open, exposing a chasm of terrifying possibilities. My parents, they kidnapped me? The words felt alien on her tongue, too grotesque to be real. Beatrice didn't answer right away. She just stared into her teacup, as if seeing the past swirling in the dark liquid. They found you, or so they claimed, she began, her voice a low, gravelly whisper that carried the weight of years of untold secrets. You were a lost little bird, and they were the kind-hearted couple who took you in. That's the story they told the world. It's a good story. People want to believe in kindness, even when it's a lie. Beatrice then began to weave a narrative, not with a storyteller's flair, but with the grim, precise detail of someone who had lived it. She spoke of a small, tight-knit community, a place where everyone knew everyone, and a fire that changed everything. It wasn't an accident. It was a crime, a deliberate act of arson that had engulfed a family home in flames. Your parents, your real parents, Beatrice said, emphasizing the word with a sad kind of reverence, were not the quiet, loving couple you remember. They were fighters. They were activists. They were a threat to people who wanted to keep a secret buried. The story unspooled with a chilling, inexorable logic. The fire was an attempt to silence them. Eleanor, then a child named Lily, was supposed to have perished in the blaze. But she hadn't. She had been with a neighbor, a woman Beatrice described as a quiet, unassuming gardener who had been taking care of her that night. The woman, terrified of what she had witnessed, had tried to hide the child. But the people who set the fire were looking for a clean sweep. And that's when they found you, Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a new, more horrifying level. Not your parents. A couple who wanted a child and were willing to take one that was, let's say, available. A child with no one to claim her. A child whose very existence was a liability. The chilling truth settled over Eleanor like a shroud. Her parents hadn't been her saviors. They had been opportunists. Accomplices. They had been part of a monstrous conspiracy to erase her identity and her past, to ensure that the truth of her parents' deaths would never see the light of day. The guilt she had always felt, the vague, shapeless sadness that haunted her, wasn't from a forgotten memory. It was the phantom ache of a stolen identity, a life that had been ruthlessly taken from her. Beatrice revealed her own connection to this dark history. She wasn't just a stranger. She was the sister of that quiet, unassuming gardener. She had witnessed the aftermath, the fear, the disappearance of a little girl who had been like a niece to her. For 40 years, she had carried the weight of that secret, a silent, festering wound that had led her down a path of despair and loss. She had lost her sister, who had vanished shortly after, and had spent her life haunted by the ghost of a child she had tried to protect. The confession was a torrent of sorrow and anger, a testament to a life spent on the fringes, looking for a way to expose the truth. She had seen Eleanor's photo in a local newspaper article about her volunteer work. And she had known. The face, the eyes, the way she carried herself, it was the little girl, all grown up. The same little Finch she had held in her arms so many years ago. Eleanor sat there, stunned. The woman across from her wasn't a crazy person. She was a witness, a victim, and a harbinger of a truth so terrible, it had the power to destroy everything Eleanor held dear. Her family, her life, her very name, it was all a lie. And in that quiet diner, with the sound of a distant ambulance siren wailing in the background, Eleanor knew that the past wasn't just awake. It was coming for its revenge. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that made the picture complete and utterly horrifying, was the identity of the people who orchestrated the fire. Beatrice, her voice strained with the weight of her revelation, didn't name them. She didn't have to. The truth was far more sinister. The people responsible were not anonymous criminals. They were pillars of the community, prominent, powerful figures who had risen to even greater heights in the decades since the fire. They were the kind of people whose names appeared in headlines for their philanthropy, their business acumen, and their political influence. Eleanor felt a cold dread settle in her bones. This wasn't just a story of a stolen identity, it was a story of a cover-up on a grand scale. Her parents had been part of it. They hadn't been victims. They had been complicit. They had benefited from a crime, living a life of quiet suburban comfort while the family they had stolen from was erased from history. Beatrice's story was a call to action, a desperate plea for justice that had been waiting 40 years to be heard. "They took everything from us, little Finch," she whispered, her eyes filled with a fresh wave of tears. "They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought they had buried the truth forever." Eleanor, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and anger, felt the weight of this new reality. She wasn't just the woman who had lost her past. She was the one who could expose the powerful people who had built their lives on lies and death. She had the proof, the witness, and the motive. The path forward was clear and terrifying. She had to uncover the truth, not just for herself, but for the memory of her real parents and for the life that was stolen from her. She had to go back. Back to the town Beatrice described, the place with the lonely trees and the house that smelled of cinnamon and dust. She had to find the truth, no matter the cost. Eleanor drove home in a daze, the city lights a blur of color through the rain-streaked window. She looked at her reflection in the glass, a stranger looking back at her. The person she had been, the successful architect, the devoted wife, the loving mother, was gone. In her place was Lily, a woman on a quest to reclaim a life that had been snatched away from her. She walked into her beautiful home, the one filled with so many memories that were now tainted by a lie, and looked at her husband, Michael. His face, once a source of comfort, now seemed like part of the carefully constructed facade. She didn't know how to tell him. How do you tell the person you love most in the world that your entire life together was built on a lie? The final scene fades to a shot of a family photograph on a mantelpiece, a smiling, happy family, a perfect, beautiful lie. The camera zooms in on Eleanor's face, her smile a haunting mask. The truth had been awakened, and it was a hungry beast. The woman at the shelter knew her childhood nickname, and in that moment, she had also awakened a monster. The lie was over. The hunt for the truth had just begun. And that's where the story of Eleanor Vance, or rather, Lily, begins. The ties you thought were forgotten are still there, just waiting for the right moment to pull you back in. If you were captivated by the story, make sure you hit that like button. It helps us reach more people who are ready to dive into the shadows of the past. If you don't want to miss the next part of this chilling tale, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. There are secrets waiting to be unearthed, and you won't want to miss a single one.